So you can begin, Jadumukhi.
Okay.
Yes,
Shall I
carry
start?
on. Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you and Jai Bhim to Mangesh and and I have been following his work in different places. Basically, I read his all post. He writes on social media. Uh, all his posts are really inspiring, and in different way raise different kind of questions. I would say he is one of a kind of a public intellectual among the Ambedkarite circle. So, and while reading some of his posts, I just sent something on Buddhism and Buddhism and comparative constitutionalism, something like that. So there is a recent book published from Cambridge University. Then recently I also made Dhananjay. Why not to do something like constitutionalism and Buddhism? In specific, Ambedkarite notion of constitutionalism, constitution, and Buddhism. So this is a short conversation that I had with them. Uh, then I had no idea that Manglish and others, they have started this reading group, and I had a chance to go through some of their talk and some of their writing. So it is always fascinating to read them. It is always inspiring and getting different kind of questions. Uh, so therefore, I thought to attempt to say something, attempt to make some sense of uh, the idea, something called Ambedkarite or Ambedkar's idea of constitutionalism and Buddhism. So, first of all, I am not a student of law or not an expert in the field of constitution or constitutionalism. But as a reader, working on Ambedkar's thought, Ambedkar's philosophy, democracy, etc. So I thought to uh, make some point to at least to understand or make an attempt to understand that how one can think about uh, Buddhism and constitutionalism or constitution. I have two set of questions to uh, begin. Uh, so this is my limitation. I am not a student of law or I am not uh, an expert on constitution or constitutionalism. So there are two set of questions coming from uh, uh, Ambedkarite politics. Uh, that where do Ambedkarite politics or Ambedkarite scholar or Ambedkarite activist, they often think this question that uh, this is Ambedkar constitution, and the idea of constitution as a normative, as a document that very much resonate with Buddhism. This is not a simple question to unravel. This is not a simple question to uh, write a paper immediately or deliver a talk. This is a very normative question because this is very unique in very different sense because uh, where and where the scholar have written on Buddhism and constitution or comparative constitution. Uh, so this book, something called Buddhism, Comparative Constitutional Law. So the idea of law and the constitution, constitutionalism. It is very interesting to look at that how Buddhism can offer something to think about, and in specific how uh, uh, Ambedkarite interpretation of Buddhism would resonate with constitution and what kind of constitution it is. That is also a question to be asked. That is also a question to be raised and understand. Uh, where therefore Ambedkarite politics or Ambedkarite activists and thinkers, writers, they often think about uh, constitution and Buddhism are very similar. So this is the first question that that come to my mind, and this question actually comes from the politics that is taking place on the ground. The second very similar question that comes to me is to say, when Ambedkarite people celebrate 26th November as a Constitution Day, however, it has become a national kind of a celebration. And this is very unique again. And this was started by none other than the Ambedkarite politics and Ambedkarite thinkers, writers, and so on. So therefore, where Ambedkarite celebrate the Constitution. So one way to understand that, how therefore Constitution give them an opportunity to think about their politics, their emancipatory politics, their transformative politics, and so on. Is it so that that Constitution only a space, only a document and a normative that would only give a chance to speak? This is one. The second part of this question is to say that how by celebrating the Constitution itself, making Indian democracy democratic. Democracy and democratic both are different terms. So making democracy democratic, I would say differently, that it is something to make Indian public democratic or create a democratic culture based on the constitutional value and constitutional normative. So when I say constitutional value and normative, it is very emancipatory. It has its emancipatory potential. So then third question is also very much part of this, is to say that why both Constitution and Buddhism have to be where somebody has to think about Constitution and Buddhism in a different way. Both are different in the sense that Constitution is a document, it's a law, it's a rule. On the other hand, when we see Buddhism, read Buddhism, Buddhism is a religion, it is a doctrine. People believe that it is a way of life. Where therefore the question is that where somebody would think about Buddhism in terms of law or constitution. So this is a question definitely one has to think about. In this case, somebody would go back to the modern time, the beginning of the modern time, thinker like Montesquieu and many others, social contract theorists. Even somebody would think about Bills of Rights in America, where the idea of constitutionalism began. But at the same time, there are also some scholars, they try to trace that how Christianity in a different way help to conceptualize religion and the law in the beginning time. So something like that. Is it possible to think about how Buddhism, when I say Buddhism is not something that the Ambedkarite are very much part of, but Buddhism is been interpreted, Buddhism is practiced differently in different region, different space, and different countries. So therefore, when we say Buddhism and constitution and law, how one can think about Buddhism that would at least appeal to kind of an appeal to in a universal sense, in a normative sense. But at the same time, Buddhism has been interpreted in the context, in the region, in different way. If somebody would go to Sri Lanka and somebody would go to Japan, would definitely see different conception, different kind of practice that people follow through Buddhism. So therefore, when somebody would think about Constitution and Buddhism, so this is not a easy question to it is not an easy question to give a definite kind of an answer. So so therefore, these are very, very challenging in the preliminary question to think about Constitution and Buddhism. So my very, very narrow interest is to say that it is an attempt to think about constitutionalism and the democracy. And when I read Ambedkar, constitutionalism, democracy, and Buddhism, actually it goes very, very parallel way. Whether one can begin from 1919 Southborough Committee memorandum, or somebody would think about his contribution of making Indian Constitution as a jurist in one part, and the other part is his social activism, his social movement from 1920s to 1956, and how in this time the question that he raised, how it also resonate with the his constitutional idea, his practice of constitutionalism. At the same time, when we bring this two kind of activism together and think about Buddhism, how it would suffice his argument to say that yes, Buddhism is also important for him to think something, think towards a transformation, think towards a transformation where the idea of equality, freedom, fraternity, justice would actually come. To say few more thing about this, this is a kind of a background that I would like to talk about. When we started reading about the idea something called constitutionalism, who I am calling Ambedkar constitutionalism. However, there are authors. They have already have written about Ambedkar Constitution. Something like a very prominent scholar from US called Martha Nussbaum. So I will make a comment on this. On the other hand, very recent book, a very popular fellow person called Suraj Engre. He makes commentary on Constitution and constitutionalism. A very, very redemptive, very, very negative kind of comments on Dalit politics and Ambedkar politics, to say that constitutionalism is very romantic and it is also very liberal. So therefore, Dalit like to think they are emancipatory politics. This is two thing that I said. On the other hand, we have seen on the public that how they have embraced constitution as their politics, as their part of politics, making democracy democratic. So when we start reading the literature on constitutionalism, it is something to do with there are two ways to understand. One is to say that how constitutionalism refers to the idea of limited government first, and second is how the idea of constitutionalism voice against or prevent the arbitrary kind of a government. And when we read these two, idea, the coming from Western literature, basically, uh, constitutionalism is against constitutionalism prevents the idea of arbitrary or authoritarian rule, uh, and the second is it also refers to the limited form of government. When it is limited form of government, basically it refers to John Locke. John Locke is a social contact theorist. And in fact, the whole social contact theories, in a very distinctive sense, they talk about the idea of limited government, which again resonate with constitutionalism. So, uh, on the other hand, when we think about constitutionalism as a kind of a doctrine, as a kind of something uh, which sometimes goes beyond the idea of constitution. So therefore, in that context, it allows us to interpret when it is when the constitutionalism talks about the limited form of government, it also critique the arbitrary and the authoritarian government. Uh, it allows us to interpret that what kind of what is this idea called constitutionalism. So therefore, in a very simple sense, constitutionalism not only a legal document or a long debate among the legal scholar, but it also helps us to explore the philosophical foundation of the state. uh, 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 to state. Also, it allows us to understand that how to govern and who is being governed, and what should be the nature of government, and so on. These are very, again, normative questions, and this normative question help us to interpret the idea of constitution, the idea of constitutional practice and constitutionalism in the given specific time and the context. So therefore, I am not, when I am saying that constitutionalism, I'm not just limiting myself to the idea of constitution. In fact, you many of us are uh, well versed in Ambedkarite thought. So Dr. Ambedkar himself, in many places, talks about the limitation of the legality, limitation of the constitution and the law. So in that sense, it is very much there is a, therefore it allows us to interpret that why not something called the constitutionalism. So so in the history of constitutionalism, one can trace from the bills of rights, one can talk about the social contact theorists, uh, uh, and then how the idea of constitutionalism help us to think about the sovereign versus the government. Even we can see very much in the present regime that we all are going through. So in the history also there are many thinkers. Just to refer to one, Montesquieu, he talks about separation of power, and the separation of power, it is within the periphery of the idea of constitutionalism. So that we see in every country, and very particularly when we take a country like India, we see how division of power and separation of power uh, is part of larger idea called constitutionalism. So, so therefore, to creating this context and talking about Dr. Ambedkar is very much important. So therefore, Ambedkar idea of constitutionalism, uh, it definitely offers to interpret. So to refer to one thing, to qualify this, that in volume number 7, many of you have read this, might have read this, where he make a very good comparison between the Brahminic law and the and Roman law. So if you read this commentary, this is a fascinating commentary where he talks about the idea of disability, you know, law and disability. So I would say there are few scholars, they have written on how Ambedkar commentary, Ambedkar writings on law, you know, help us to think about how Ambedkar is also a jurist in the sense as a thinker of law. Of course, there are very less work. But there are very few scholars. They have engaged and to call Ambedkar as a jurist or Ambedkar jurisprudence or Ambedkar's jurisprudence. So there are very few scholars. I can refer to one is Akash Singh Rathore, then you know, Upendra Bakshi and few others. So, but there are scope to again engage with Ambedkar's writing on Ambedkar thoughts on law, jurisprudence, constitution, constitutionalism in terms of thought. So, uh, so to again to say a few more things about the question that I am interested to I'm grappling with is this uh, 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 even sometime we read constitution as a, revolutionary documents, constitution as revolution. So it is Austin, he thinks about, he wrote it about long back, constitution as a revolution. So these are very preliminary question, these are very uh, serious question, normative question. Similarly, I can refer to another scholar, Hannah Arendt, when she thinks about social question. Hannah Arendt is a Jew, was a Jew, and how Jews were uh, uh, been ostracized in 1950s, 60s. Therefore, she kind of a revolutionary. She therefore tilted towards the constitutional method. So therefore, she tries to say that how social question could be addressed through the constitutional method, and she endorsed the American kind of constitutionalism, American development of constitutionalism, where the idea of democracy, the idea of liberty and the freedom, uh, are there. So, therefore, there are so much to connect, and there are so much to say when we think about Ambedkar's notion of Ambedkar idea of constitutionalism, uh, and to connect with the large amount of literature, large amount of uh, uh, large amount of literature in one hand, and thinkers, the way they have contributed to the area of law, constitution, constitutionalism. So a very limited kind of a comment that I would like to make when we think about Buddhism and constitutionalism, constitution, is to say that how the idea of law or the constitutional legality emerge. This is a very important question for me. It is because to say that it is something where we come to know there is a liberal philosophy, and the idea of legality, idea of law, constitution, it is something to uh, uh, offer to the people. When I say people, I mean to say it is something that the elite, they would construct legality, legal law and constitution. In one hand, it would actually give a very lofty picture. It would allow everyone to think about freedom and equality. On the other hand, it would actually help the elite, the ruling class. So this is a very very limited reading that I am doing. So basically this question coming from Rousseau, that how uh, 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 the elite and the oppressor, they actually offer something, and they 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 used this in very different way. So therefore, when you think about Buddhism and the constitutionalism, one definitely think about this, that how Buddhism as the way Ambedkar has interpreted as a revolutionary force, as a revolutionary, doctrine, a doctrine that could, bring social change, a doctrine that could, talk about social question in a Hannah Arendt, way. In one hand, on the other hand, how the very origin of the constitutionalism, been used so much by the liberal thinkers. However, one can again problematize that in a context like India, uh, 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 the the existing law, or uh, the existing law, which is very very Brahminical, which refers to Manu's law, uh, uh, in one hand. On the other hand, there is constitutional law, and the constitutional law, constitutionalism, completely contradicts with the completely contradicts with the modern constitutional idea. So therefore, when we think about Buddhism and Constitution in a context like India, definitely the modern idea of Constitution, however, it is very, it comes from liberal philosophy, but it definitely offers something to engage, to raise question, or to talk about very very emancipatory politics. So therefore, in this context, when you think about Buddhism, Ambedkar constitutionalism, it definitely, you know uh, 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 allow us to think in a different way to explore these questions. So uh, so therefore, my attempt here is to just to attempt to understand that how this all question that I have raised in very different way uh, uh, help us to think through, or the question that I'm trying to understand and raise, it definitely needs an exploration of whether it is a comparative analysis of uh, constitutional practices of different kind of different regime, or different countries, or different thinker in one hand. On the other hand, it is something like that, why a group of people, why in a context like India, thinkers like Ambedkar or Ambedkarite, the post Ambedkar phenomena, that people so much celebrate the constitution as a document, as a normative, basically that allow them to think about their politics, and how it is resonating with the Buddhism. Again, where Ambedkar, had to convert to Buddhism, and therefore people, directly link with this lineage of thinking, constitutionalism, uh, 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 anti-caste thought, or uh, and then constitution and Buddhism. So there is a link to this all. And when you pick up a few scholars, to whoever have written on this, of course their attempt is to understand Ambedkar constitution in a very uh, formalistic sense. This reference, actually I'm referring to Martha Nussbaum. Martha Nussbaum, however, contributed to understand Ambedkar constitution, but after reading this, I would say that C is a philosopher likes to, interpret the radicalness, the substantive, idea of Ambedkar Constitution and constitutionalism. Similarly, the thing that I had referred to, uh, uh, the another scholar, uh, very popular person, uh, he also fails to understand uh, the uh, the potential emancipatory potential of Ambedkarite idea of constitution and constitutionalism. Uh, in some sense, his critique, you know, uh, I would not say valid, but one need to understand that in what context Ambedkarite, celebrate constitution. So it should not be a romantic kind of a celebration. Rather, this kind of celebration need to be understood that how it has its own radical potentiality. So therefore, and there are many others, commentator and writer, their attempt to understand Ambedkar constitution, constitutionalism in general, in Indian specific, only reference goes to Ambedkar. So therefore, to say that in Indian context, uh, it is only the Ambedkar who could, think about constitutionalism, constitution as a very, very transformative, idea, documents, and 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 so on. So, one thing that I have written a paper on this. Uh, uh, it is something to understand that how all this that Ambedkar was trying to do is to create something called, uh, it is it is to create a a condition uh, by which uh, a a democratic culture would evolve, a democratic practice could come. uh, so because to cite one or two things to understand this, that uh, as many of us we have read Ambedkar's uh, writing, and many of his writing, he in his writing he also brings out the limitation of law and the legality. I could refer to immediate writing, that is his talk in 1936, uh, uh, what way emancipation, where he really think about uh, 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 the limitation of the rights in the sense he refers to legal thing. To him, to quote, the law guarantee various rights, but society does not allow individual to exercise those rights. So, rights which is guaranteed by law but is opposed by the society is of no use at all. So one need to understand, this in terms of his constitutionalism, in the sense that I'm just trying to make a 2 point make distinction between the constitution and the constitutionalism. His critique of the limitation of law, one can understand through the idea of constitutionalism, because constitutionalism is a doctrine, is a philosophy that allows to interpret the certain context and the in the certain specific reason. So therefore, and it is also very much true when we go to society, the society is governed by the law of Manus. So therefore, I will make another comment on this, that how Ambedkar is also how Ambedkar is a jurist in very different way. A jurist in the in a very theoretical sense, because he was a person who could burn Manusmriti. Manusmriti, everybody understood as law. It's Manu's law. It is Brahmanic law and so on. And burning Manusmriti is not an easy task to do. So it means that he is rejecting the very idea of law, the idea of legality, the ancient law, however it present uh, uh, in all the time, whether modern, ancient, and contemporary. And he also make a different conception of law, legality, and constitution and constitutionalism. Therefore, it is not only rejection, but it is also a very normative. It is also very a proposal that a philosopher actually does. So to justify, to qualify this argument, I have another instance to say that uh, uh, he writes in this very classic lecture, Rana de Gandhi and China, in 1943, where he says that uh, the idea of making gift of fundamental rights to every individual, no doubt, is laudable. The question is how to make them effective. The prevalent view is that once rights are enacted in a law, then they are safeguarded. This again is an unwarranted assumption. And experience proves that rights are not protected by law but social and moral conscience of society. Uh, Social conscience is such that it is to recognize the rights which law chooses to enact. Rights will be safe and secure, but fundamental rights are opposed by the community. No parliament, no judiciary can guarantee them in a real sense of the word. I would not, read the full uh, uh, quotation of full writing of this. However, he goes on to, cite Edmund Burke and others. So, how one can make sense of this passage? So, therefore, the idea of constitutionalism uh, uh, give us to interpret the how constitution and legality has its own limitation. When I say constitutionalism, or the very definition of constitutionalism is to talk about the limited government, talk about how sometime the government become very very authoritarian and so on. So therefore, this is one part of it. The other part of the idea called constitutionalism, one need to understand uh, uh, the when he talks about constitutional morality, when he talks about public conscience, he talks about democracy, and democracy, not democracy as merely a form of government, but democracy, how democracy could be, a very could be a way of life in which a democratic culture would evolve. So, so it is to say that how Ambedkar uh, is trying to create a condition by which a democratic idea could be realized in society. So I could refer to his essay in the Riddles in Hinduism, the last essay. This is very very theoretical essay again, where he talks about how democracy could be a way of life. So therefore, to uh, now the Ambedkar's thought on the constitutionalism, and how the constitutionalism and his democratic idea and his fighting against caste, uh, or annihilation of caste again as something uh, you know like very concept, not in very loose term, but in a very conceptual term, that how annihilation, I would definitely relate with the very burning of Manusmriti and annihilation would go very very similar. So therefore, he is rejecting the very idea of law and proposing a different kind of law, different conception of law, by which is very, very complementary to the idea of a democracy and democratic form of government and so on. So in this context, when I say all this, his idea of constitutionalism, where he also talks about uh, constitutional morality, he also refers to uh, uh, democracy as, something to do with the moral practice of a person. So if all one can understand this part of, Ambedkar's, intervention, Ambedkar contribution to idea of constitutionalism, this definitely resonate with his interpretation of Buddhism. I'm not saying that, the whole idea of Buddhism would resonate with his interpretation of Buddhism, his interpretation of Constitution and Buddhism. Uh, uh, because everybody, as we all aware, that Buddhism is, practiced, interpreted, understood differently, different way in different part of the world. So therefore, but this context, in the context that, Ambedkar writes and, talks about Buddhism, his politics, his emancipatory politics, his constitutional politics. When I say constitutional politics, one should not, read uh, constitutionalism or constitution through John Locke tradition, or, through liberal tradition. Uh, Ambedkar interpretation of constitutionalism is very, very radical. It is not even something, very, very reformist. That, in one article, Anurag, another very fascinating scholar, he refers to this. So therefore, this class and this kind of platform is something very, very interesting and unique for all of us to think about the question that, we all raise, and the question that I raise particularly in this class, that whether how one can therefore interpret Buddha and his Dhamma, how therefore one can interpret 1936 talk and his different writing on, Buddhism, his commentary on Buddhism, whether it is, the rise and fall of Hindu women, where, one can think about the dialogue between Buddha and Anand, then therefore, the idea of equality would come as far as, women are concerned. Uh, whether it is 1936 talk in which Ambedkar bring out the limitation of legality. Or whether it is Indian Constitution, uh, or his commentary on the constitutionalism and constitution in Constituent Assembly debates and different other writing, help us to think uh, 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 and make sense of Buddha and his Dhamma. So therefore, when somebody says, some Ambedkarites say in a very rhetorical sense, in very public meeting, that, this question comes very often in Maharashtra. Whenever I go to Maharashtra and Nagpur and many other parts, uh, definitely you see people embrace constitution the way they embrace Buddhism. But one has to, critically engage with the way constitution is being practiced in India, and how Ambedkar see constitution and Buddhism in different way. So therefore, how one can, make sense of Buddha and his Dhamma and his writing on Buddhism, and, extrapolate something or make an attempt to interpret that this is a different, conception of modern, I would say modern, not law, not merely law, modern law, or, the constitutionalism or the constitution. Constitution is very fixed, constitutionalism very broad. So therefore, I would rather refer to constitutionalism. How therefore his interpretation of Buddhism, and particularly the text like Buddha and his Dhamma, help us to think about the constitutionalism that address to a particular context like India, also that help us to think and help us to broaden the idea of constitutionalism could be applied, could be available, could be interpreted in different parts of the world. So uh, one can think about this question. The other way to think about uh, uh, I'm not even, a great scholar on Buddhism, so it is my inadequacy to make any, any judgment or any, remarks on this. But definitely, in my limited understanding, how therefore, when somebody would think about question of law, constitutional, comparative constitution, and uh, texts like Tripitaka, because Tripitaka also essentially talks about uh, a different set of rule, and this different set of rule is to for layman, for a monk, for a nun, or and many others, people who are interested to to be a Buddhist, to follow Buddhism, and so on. So so therefore, when we say, when we try to understand or think about this very new idea, Buddhism and the comparative constitution, or law and something like this. Uh, 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 is it a right question to study Buddhism and law and comparative constitution, or while doing that, uh, in a way, it offers a new interpretation to understand. At the same time, uh, how uh, or it is to make Buddhism within the limitation of law and the constitution. I think that would be a very narrow understanding of it. Therefore, this exercise to understand uh, uh, Buddhism and Constitution through Ambedkarite lens, through Ambedkar's lens, through his writing and speeches and so on, would give a very transformative idea of Buddhism and constitutionalism. That would suffice. That would be the purpose to think about this exercise. It is not merely to think that how uh, 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 Tripitaka is a book. It is a book of morality and ethics for different people. If someone would read, a lawyer would read, a jurist would read, would interpret differently. But when similarly, a jurist like Ambedkar would read Tripitaka and and different texts in Buddhism, and read and interpret law and constitution, how does it make sense? In my view, when I read constitutionalism as a theory coming from different parts of the world, and his activism against caste, patriarchy, and the majoritarianism, Hindu majoritarianism, uh, and his idea of constitutionalism, uh, it is very contradictory. And when we read his constitutionalism as a doctrine, as a method to develop, as a method to allow for different interpretation of different contexts, and the Buddhism for social change, uh, not merely social change, rather to think about a good how to live a good life, and this good life also uh, distinctively different from Hindu way of life, or Christian way of life, or a Muslim way of life. So in that sense, the constitutionalism, the way Ambedkarite celebrate to make this democracy democratic, and his idea of Buddhism to create a condition to make it realizable, and his idea of Buddhism to think as a way of life, as a to live a good life. Again, to live a good life, it is a very normative question, and this question also goes back to classical political philosophy, like Aristotle and many others, Plato, many others people have referred. Many people, even contemporary thinkers like John Rawls, many people have raised this question. So when we read Ambedkar and to think about the idea of good life through this process of one is to fight against the injustice, the systemic injustice that resonate with in fighting against systemic injustice. Solution is the constitutionalism, and to make it more comprehensible, make it more realizable, make it more enriching to the people, there is Buddhism. So therefore, when somebody would reinterpret the conception of Ambedkarite notion of constitutionalism and Buddhism, there is a scope to interpret, and there is a scope to engage. So this much I would say, uh, uh, and thank you so much, Mangesh Bhao, I would say, and so much to learn from your reading and your post and your engagement. And uh, this is this is an attempt to unravel with all this question. And this question, I'm writing a paper on this, but definitely this is not a full-fledged paper, but one aspect of uh, mm, one part of this question would definitely be addressed in the paper. So and 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 thank you so much, Jevin.
Thank you, Jadu. That was a very erudite exposition. You raised a lot of good questions that needs to be answered. And, sometimes it is very important to raise questions because, that is the gateway to knowing more and more. So thank you so much for raising a lot of questions today. Very extremely happy and grateful to you for joining us today for this course on Buddhism and Constitutional Law. So I will open up the class for another 5 minutes. If there is any comment, anything that anybody would like to discuss here, so please go on. Dara, you have anything to say? Padmakar sir, Ramesh ji, Vasnik ji, Nikhil, Tejendra ji.
Jai Bhim, sir.
Jai Vinta.
I have one quote of Baba Saheb Ambedkar.
Hmm.
He said, "Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated and nurtured." Thank you, sir. It was a wonderful session.
Great. So Jadu, thank you so much for
Yes.
joining in today, and we will continue to engage in our discussion groups, and let's discuss more on these ideas because they are so crucial for
Yes.
movement.
Yes.
Thank you, Jadu, and see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And this quote referred by who raised this question?
Tara.
So constitutional morality need to be cultivated. So this is something to do with again Buddhism, and Buddhism talk about and what kind of morality one would think. So therefore, how Buddhism uh, as a religion essentially talks about the morality. So according to Dr. Ambedkar, uh, uh, morality and morality is a way of life, and morality is a way of life when he says that uh, it doesn't discriminate anyone, it doesn't make someone low or high. So when Ambedkar refers to such kind of constitutional morality, and constitutional morality need to be cultivated in a society like India, one need not to only read through the caste inequality in India, but at the same time how the communal the how society is communal in different way. So therefore it also when we read this, his essay on communal deadlock, where he talks about a communal majority, and communal majority in India is a Hindu majority, and how in a majoritarian society how minority are living. So he refers to the question of minority, and how therefore the existing government, the existing existing government, and the way it has been governed and ruled, how therefore in that context minority are living. Do minority have the sense of equality, freedom, and so on, justice, and so on? How therefore majority all the time uh, you know govern, or he calls this tyrannical you know government. So therefore one should not only read through the caste, one has to also read that how minority would suppressed by the majority, and therefore the idea of constitutional morality need to be cultivated as a democratic ethos. And this democratic ethos, therefore Ambedkar create precondition to realize this all. So thank you for this quote, and thank you Mangesh for giving this opportunity to think about these questions.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. See you in the next. And thank you so much all.